The Motorola 112114 radio was the original radio fitted to my X36 Series 1. It's an early 1970s radio, actually made by Radiomobile, and it's a simple long wave, medium wave radio. In this tutorial, I'm just going to cover how I added Bluetooth. It's a very similar process to also add auxiliary in, actually a little bit easier. It should also apply to other similar radios of the same vintage. To do this project, I bought a radio from eBay that was new old stock. It was untested, and actually when I tried it, it wasn't working. So I had to do a couple of repairs first. I won't cover that in this tutorial. So the first thing was just to check and get the radio working. And then the next thing was to start to look at how to add the Bluetooth to it. For the projects, there was a few bits and pieces needed to get, and it was worth looking around for these. The first is a Bluetooth module, a simple Bluetooth receiver, USB powered. I found one on eBay. You can get them on Amazon or anywhere else. Mainly I was looking for one that was a small size. And the second is a small USB power supply. So this is a DC-DC converter to go from the 12 volts from the car to 5 volts to run the Bluetooth module. In addition, a couple of leads and a couple of resistors are needed as well. 1k ohm quarter watt resistors. The first stage was to take the radio apart, have a look, see what's what, and then to identify the hot input onto the potentiometer that's used for the volume control. Radios like this, there are at least 3 connections. This one has more because it has tone control and power on off on the same switch. But the 3 volume connections, when you look from the back of the potentiometer, normally the earth is on the extreme of one side, and the live input is on the other side, and in the middle will be the output. So it's quite easy to work out which one is live by touching each of them with a metal screwdriver, holding it in your hand, and you'll hear a loud buzzing. You should be able to see this now on the video. For me, the next step was to disconnect the output from the radio circuits. I wasn't going to keep the long wave, medium wave radio because I know I'm not going to use it. But if you did want to keep it, you would need to then wire in a dual pole, dual throw switch to switch between the Bluetooth and the conventional radio. But I'm just going to disconnect the radio, which on mine was a single white wire coming to that same terminal on the volume control. So I simply cut it and pushed it out of the way. The next step, at this stage, I made up a very simple lead with a jack socket on one end that can plug into an iPhone or similar, and a phono socket on the other, and then from the phono socket a small flying lead to take one channel, because the radio is only mono, and connect that to the live input, and the other side of that to the ground. Having done that, I then turned it on and just ran it as a straightforward aux in. And if you actually only wanted to put aux in and not have a Bluetooth, you could almost stop at this stage. Once this was working okay, then connected up the Bluetooth, but only on a temporary way. So I was using a separate power supply to power the DC-DC converter, connected that to the Bluetooth module, which I'd taken out of its packaging, and then from the output of the Bluetooth module to the input to the volume control. But all of that was sitting outside of the radio itself. From this point, I knew it would all work. I then had to look at how to trigger the Bluetooth pairing mode. The Bluetooth adapter that I bought had a single micro switch on the side, which if the unit was fitted inside the radio wouldn't be accessible. So I looked for a way to incorporate that. And what I actually did was solder on a couple of flying leads and connected these to the long wave, medium wave, actually the long wave switch. There was a long wave switch in the radio, and used that then to trigger the Bluetooth. So if I ever want to pair the Bluetooth, once it's installed in the car, I just have to push the long wave button, and then for normal use I push it into medium wave. I had to disconnect the existing circuits because I didn't want any complications. I just wanted to have a plain switch. I didn't want to be creating some sort of circuit with the long wave and medium wave. At this point everything's working. There's a small problem with the input though, because it's only taking one channel of the stereo channel, and so you're only getting half of the sounds coming through, and you can't connect both channels together directly because they cancel each other out. So the solution to that is, before the left and right input signals are connected to the volume control, is to put a 1K resistor from each of them. It can be 1K, 500 ohms, 2K, something like that, and that will prevent the signals cancelling each other out. So the next thing I did was just to add that to the bottom of the radio. With that done, there's not really much more to do other than to package everything up and put it into the radio itself. The first time I tried doing this, there was quite a lot of noise generated from the Bluetooth. Obviously the audio circuits in the radio aren't designed to be running with a Bluetooth transmitter mounted right next to them, and also an additional power supply as well. And so I took as much care as I could to try and keep the audio leads short, and to make sure they were separated from the power leads and everything else in the unit as far as possible, in order not to have too much of a buzz or hissing noise. In my case, I was lucky enough to find room for the Bluetooth module. It came with a small battery, which acted, I think, as a bit of a to smooth out the power supply as well, and the small DC-DC converter and all the cables could all fit within inside the case. On a different radio, it might not be possible to do that, and so it could be possible to mount all or any of the parts of that system outside of the radio somewhere discreetly in the car. In some ways it might be better to have the Bluetooth module away, and then there'll be less issues with interference, but I quite like the idea of having it all integrated into one. So having worked out where everything was going to go, I then cut the leads to the right lengths, soldered all of the connections. I used a glue gun to mount the additional circuits into the casing, and put some extra insulation around the casing as well, so I didn't want the outer casing touching the new circuit boards, and put it all back on, covers back on, and tested it.